Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's Evidence-Based Project Management Roundtable. Before I hand it off to Jim Hannon, our speaker, I wanted to just remind you that we appreciate you coming. We appreciate you coming each month to these great sessions. There are other roundtables as well, and Mass Bay PMI chapter does a wonderful job in trying to reach out to other people, other project managers. There's an event coming up at Blue Hills, I believe. Consider joining that, being part of it, and talking with your fellow peers, whether you're officially a member of PMI or not. We'd love to have you attend. For today's session, we have Jim Hannon, and he's talking about, well, according to the slide, the importance of decision making, but it's also on the why decision latency is so important. And with that, I want to pass it off to Jim so he can do a much better job presenting this and explain his background and skills. And yeah, thank you for joining.
Okay, thanks, Sean. Can everybody hear my voice?
Yes.
Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so welcome everybody. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. Let me give you some background on myself. I actually have got my I'm actually focusing on my Northeastern doctorate. I also teach at Northeastern. I teach enterprise risk. I teach a bunch of different subjects. I'm also a certified trainer with Scrum Inc., if everyone knows that. And I also do Scrum at Scale, and I do a bunch of other stuff. Needless to say, at the end of the month, at the end of the year, my wife always says, how much do we spend on certifications? So that always is a running joke for us. I'm also a executive coach, C-level experience for a company in Boston, manager of the founder of the BU Agile Innovation Lab. So I do BU Adjunct and also Northeastern. And I also, here's a list of other companies that I work with. So I want to do this in a different way, all right? And I want to do it mixing, especially I do PMP teaching. I want to do it mixing PMP, project management, and Agile all together. You know, because as I've looked at this subject, it's a subject really not really talked about by project managers. And what I found is there's one specific slide that I'm going to show. And I always say, throw away all your project management books, throw away all you've learned in Agile, throw away everything. What this decision latency does is this sinks your project if you don't understand it. So let's go through it. As I do this, I also I run a company called Deeper Training, which I do Scrum at Scale training. I do a number of other certifications. I do value stream. I do PMP testing. And above all, I teach in Northeastern, which I extremely love because it's a very hands-on school. So we're just finishing our semester, and I've taught risk for, I don't know, 10, 15 years. And that has been a great experience for me. So what I want to do is make this very interactive. So feel free to stop me as I go. You want to go through and you want to talk about decision making. What criteria you use to make decisions, all right? And you inform aspects of the organization's success. So decisions seem very simple, right? But again, what they do is they're very complicated. And decision making in regards to process resulting in the selection of a specific item, all right, belief, all right, and you have alternate options, value preferences. One of the biggest impediments that organizations have is, one, they cannot make decisions. Two, they can't prioritize. And three, the organization is not adept enough to actually what we call refactoring. So that's really the biggest issue. Every decision-making process has a final choice. And what we find is that most of the decisions usually are done with no data, and it's just sort of a hunch. And based off of that, they make a good decision. All right. So it's an important leadership skill because it helps managers. Now, again, what happens is managers are key in this, right? And especially in the new work world, managers, especially in Agile, are someone out there who's not involved in the daily run-of-the-mill of the team. Effective decisions save time and propel work projects forward. This is important because along with prioritization, along with making sure the organization can pivot, you have to make good decisions. And by having decision latency, which is the time it takes for when you see the decision to when you actually make the decision, that bureaucracy in the company, and project managers can really attest to this, is really vital. Because if you see the bureaucracy, and this is where you throw in lean, this is where you throw in a bunch of other different things that you've learned. And once you start to do that, you make the organization leaner. This is extremely effective, right? And you want to make sure that decision making is done appropriately, right? So how we do this, managers use leadership abilities to guide the team members and improve the organization. One of the biggest issues I've seen, I'm going to relate a lot of practical experience that I've had, is that most managers know they have to make a decision, know they understand what they have to do, but they're getting held up, right? And usually the case is they either have too much bureaucracy, or they need to go, that manager needs to go to the manager over here and the manager above them, and they actually have to figure out what bureaucracy do they have to fight. And that bureaucracy is going to impact employees, right? And I'm sure you can all attest to this. So to make effective decisions as a leader, maybe help to understand how decision-making skills help you make tough choices. Everything about business, I teach the project manager students that I teach with, everything about business is these managers need to make decisions, and especially in Agile, you set the direction, you give the goals to the team, and project management, you should be doing the same thing, but you have to make sure you make the decision based off of data. And especially all companies, including the company I work for now, is extremely bureaucratic in some areas. And most companies say that's okay, because again, it's a risk management technique. But again, what ends up happening is, as they become more bureaucratic, it slows down decision making. So you want to improve workplace productivity, create action plans in emergency situations, establish trust with the employees, and reduce conflict. Let's focus in that third one. As I've seen this, I've worked in many situations where, a senior manager needs to make a decision, but that senior manager needs to go to the next level. So by the time they go 2 to 3 levels up, the clock is ticking, all right? And you look at companies like Tesla, you look at other companies that we look at in Northeastern, and they make quick decisions. They have very light meetings, and they make very on-the-spot decisions that they actually decide this will work for us. And sometimes the decisions are wrong, right? But they're quick enough to say they can adjust to it. So really the framework of good decision-making is really about, can you actually set the priorities? 2, can you actually change the organization to attach different things, right? And 3, can you actually refocus the organization? All right, so some skills that you want to have in decision-making process: research, creativity, critical thinking, time management, and emotional intelligence. Let's look at number 5. Number 5 is very difficult to see in most managers. Most managers, in my opinion, they've gone up the ranks based off of the experience they've had, based off of the projects they've done. And they lack some emotional intelligence. I'm not saying that every manager does, but they really get an issue with conflict. And conflict is where you have bureaucratic companies and they go from one extreme to another. The business unit that actually needs to make the decision needs to go to the third business unit who actually is key to making that decision. And there's conflict, right? And you have critical thinking and you have research. You have to understand the facts behind the decision. So let's go through the steps of making a decision, all right? Any questions so far?
I do not see
Yeah.
anything in the chat, so you're good to move forward.
Okay. Did you say there's anything in the chat?
There's nothing in the chat, so you're
Okay,
good to move forward.
All right, so we have to identify the decision, gather relevant information, identify the alternatives, weigh the evidence, choose among the alternatives, take action, and review decision. That's long. That really is. So what we want to do is, as project managers and as Agilists, where we actually use the Agile framework, is make these decisions quicker, right? and make them with enough data that you can actually use this. And again, what we have is the company I work with, we have real-time data. We can actually see where things are going, and that's important. So you have to identify the decision. That's the key, right? If you're making a decision about something that's wrong, or you're actually looking at it and saying, we're going to make the decision about this, and it's way off base, then you're going to have an issue. Make sure you identify the alternatives, weigh the evidence, choose among the alternatives. But again, this seems to be very, very long. All right, making the right decision, recognizing the problem or opportunity. We talked about this in the risk class that I teach, right? And you have negative risk and positive risk. But again, what happens is there's an opportunity in that positive risk. Let me ask you a question. Let's talk about Jeff Bezos and Amazon and Whole Foods. Do you think Whole Foods was a positive or negative risk for Jeff Bezos? Any comments, anybody? Anybody?
Positive.
It's a very positive risk. But again, he made the decision to actually take that on. Now, could that have turned to a negative decision? Yes, very, very clearly. So you have to make sure you have to identify the problem or the opportunity. And then you have to look at why will this benefit your customers or fellow employees? So a perfect example is we had a situation in the company I worked at where we needed another group within the company to actually help us and actually go through and identify what work we needed them to do. Well, it didn't go smoothly. It went for actually 3 months. And in those 3 months, we went back and forth. And these are high-level senior managers, right? And the organization was really not flexible enough to actually make those decisions and pivot effectively. All right. Next is gather the information. You can make a decision based on facts and data, right? And everybody, every manager and all the folks on the phone, you have that internal clock, the internal gut feeling, and again, what happens is, as I start to work with new project managers, I always find it very interesting because I turn to them and say, most of the decisions you're going to get and most of the decisions you're going to make are internal gut feels because they don't have enough time to make that value judgment, right? Is the information relevant and how can you get it? All right. What you need to know to make the right decisions and actively seeking out anyone who needs to be involved. That's a very volatile, I wouldn't say volatile, but it's a statement that really draws a lot of people into decision making. All right. So this is plain decision making. All right. Once you have to identify in alternatives. All right. Once you have a clear understanding of the issue, it's time to identify the various alternative solutions. I've been in many situations, and I'm sure a lot of people on the phone here. You're actually making a decision about something, and you realize, oh my God, I'm not making the right decision. That's one issue. Oh my God, I'm not making the decision about the right problem. That's another issue. So you have to make sure you understand the problem. So you have project risk, you have project management, you have agile, you have all of those different things that you have to take into account. And now you look at it and you say, okay, identify the problem. We're going to actually figure out how do you identify alternatives and make sure the course of action is the best way to achieve your objective. Okay. So now, as you go to the fourth step, you actually weigh the evidence, right? Evaluate the feasibility, acceptability, and desirability to know which alternative is the best. And again, classic risk management. You may pick an alternative that is not good, right? Now, what you have is, companies who are, like I said before, very bureaucratic, and you actually have to move effectively to the other stream, right? You have to adjust. You have to make sure. Just a show of hands, how many people work for companies that are very bureaucratic? Anybody?
No.
No. Anybody have examples of companies that are very bureaucratic?
Well, we have 2 hands raised here, so we have folks. We have Jose and Vanna, which hand raised.
Okay. There's a question here: how is emotional intelligence impacting decision making? Again, one of the things I really stress in project management is there's people behind these decisions, right? And again, what would happen is most project managers get involved in senior management positions, and then you actually go through and you don't have the emotional intelligence, you don't have the ability to work with each other, and that is very, very common. I've seen it many, many times. So emotional intelligence impacts decision making. How does it do that? You're afraid of things. You're really making sure you're not going to go to the negative, and that's where how emotional intelligence affects it. What are the important skills to make quick and critical decisions? I'm going to go through that at the end of the presentation. You have to understand what data you're going to have, and especially nowadays, you actually have data in real time, right? So you can actually see things and see what the impact is going to be. Any other questions? Okay. So as we continue and go through the 7 steps of decision making, all right, choose among the alternatives. When it's time to make a decision, be sure you understand the risk involved with your chosen route. You may also select a combination of alternatives, and this is really key here, a combination of alternatives. As you start to do in the risk mitigation plans, you have to make sure you understand, if I take this risk and I take this decision, what alternatives do I have if it goes bad, all right? And you have to make sure you understand the information and the potential risks that are associated, all right? So number 6, take action, all right? Create an implementation plan. If I had $1 for every time I've been in situations where companies have not done this, they've actually taken a week, 2 weeks, I'm going to show some statistics later on, and that actually draws the decision out, all right? What resources are required in gaining support from employees and stakeholders? And it's always good to do that, yes, but again, what happens is the staff is looking at you saying, what decisions are you going to make, right? And how come you're taking so long to do that? And then usually what happens is you start to get morale problems, right? If you don't make decisions quickly. And then review, all right? And this is the most overlooked step, all right? Start to review this, evaluating decisions for effectiveness. Ask yourself what you did well and what can be improved next time. So this could be a lessons learned, right, in regular project management, or a retrospective in Agile. But again, what happens is decisions is a process, and you've seen this here with these 7 steps. You want to make sure you go through that process effectively and try to identify how you can actually make it happen. Even the most experienced business owners can learn from their mistakes. You're ready to adapt your plan as necessary, or to switch to another potential solution. Keep that in mind, right? I've worked with some small business owners, and they are very quick at making decisions. They have that internal gut feeling. Now, a lot of managers, I hate to say it, do the same thing, right? If they've been in the business a long time, they know if they make this decision, it's going to have this impact. But again, what happens is switch to another potential solution. Make your organizations more adaptable, all right? That's the most important thing. And the reason why they're not adaptable is they have a tremendous amount of bureaucracy attached to them, all right? So make the right decision. Sometimes you make the right decision right, all right? Sort of a quote to leave here. Common ways people deal with, as I put it, right, hiccups. Most people hide their heads in this case, the ice, right? I'm sure we can all have certain situations. We have certain stories where people just are frozen. They cannot make it. They cannot make the decision. So again, you have to have that ability to make decisions. Decision latency is the amount of time it takes for a team to make a decision in response to business change. You see this with the AI, ChatGPT. You see this with a lot of different things, whether it be Northeastern or be business or profit. Even the most sophisticated times, notice a troubling change, formulate questions, reaching an answer, and taking action can be days, in some cases, weeks. That is very, very crucial. You want to decrease that as much as possible. And if you don't decrease that, what you're going to do is you're going to have product failures, or you're not going to be able to use products to get market share. All right. So decision latency, when you say decision latency to people, they're going to look at you and go, okay, all right, I sort of know what you mean, but I sort of don't know what you mean. If you measure decision latency, or better known as cost of delay, right, those two statistics, that is very telling. You know, it also tells not only how quickly can your management make decisions and make the right ones, but also how well can the organization support those decisions to be made. All right. So let's talk about Scrum, right? And let's talk about Agile, again, another project manager framework. There's three mega issues that companies face. Prioritization, you have limited resources, all right? You have to deliver, all right, which is important, high quality working product. Now, again, if you look at project management or Agile, it's the same type of decisions. It's the same type of mega issues. If you have those issues, you need to address it as a project manager. So let's say you're being a project manager for a very big initiative for your company. You need to state those. You need to bring those out to people and say, well, the reason why we're not able to move quickly is because we have these mega issues. And refactoring. Can you actually change the organization and make it more lean? If I had it to do all over, I would have taken a lean class early on, right? Because again, it's an agile project management method, but it's really essential. As you start to look at lean, you start to look at where you're making your decisions, and you're starting to look at where you're making your value. And then anything that does not add value, and that's simply this: if the customer is not going to pay for it, you don't have it. You shouldn't be doing it. Okay. Let's spend a few minutes on this slide. All right. So, and this is statistics that I just find amazing. You know, and this is from the Standards Group. 25% of what you work on, and whether it's agile or regular project management, the customer will use. That's 25%. Roughly 45% of the staff delivering changes, the customer will never or rarely use. I work for a company called Sunguard, they're no longer in existence. And as I was down in New York talking to clients, you know, and working for them on a day-to-day basis, I actually said, oh, we could do this or we could do that. And they said, really? Do you have that functionality? If you look at your iPhone that you have on your desk right now, does everybody use the maximum functionality that you have? They don't. And I asked that question in class. And that's called junk storage. So this is stuff that if you could get rid of those, you could actually increase that 25%. And then dock work. Typically 30% of the staff working on zero value storage. Why do you have that? Why do you have junk work? Right? Because as you start to look at this, if it takes you an hour, right, as we say here, takes you an hour to make a decision, the chances of success are 58%. If it takes you more than 5 hours, the chances of success are 18%. And this is from the Standards Group. Look at the difference between the failure, 9% and 32%. So again, what you do is lack of direction causes staff to make up work. I've seen this happen. You cannot go through and make priorities. Senior management, I've done Agile a long time and I've done project management a long time. Every time I teach a class, I say, can you actually prioritize? Can you disseminate that down into the ranks? And by them not doing that correctly and taking too much time, they're increasing the failure of their project. Unwillingness to prioritize proliferates useless projects. One of the biggest things I did as a project manager, it was 3 companies ago. I actually went through everything we had and asked, is this project still add value? And based off of that, it reduced the backlog of the project, and i.e. it would reduce the decision latency we would have. So we can make that. This delayed decision making is the primary driver of project failure and budget overrun. Take all the project management we're talking about, take all the agile. That's the basic reason why project fail. All right, and I'm going to stop there. Questions?
I do not see any questions or anything in the chat.
Okay. Government, office of project.
I don't know if this went to everyone. Anishma Maitre actually, the president of NUPM asked, how does an emotional intelligence impact decision making, and what are the important skills to make you need to make quick and critical decisions? We can answer that now or later. It's entirely up to you.
Yeah, and again, emotional intelligence is, I see it all the time. Managers in one unit are trying to work with another unit, and the key emotional intelligence is, can you cooperate? Companies talk about cooperation all the time, and can you collaborate? Well, guess what? Not everybody can do it correctly. So all the key things, all the key variables, and those are variables that you see in the PMP exam. Companies are not able to do that, and the people in the company are not able to do that. What key things I put it as, and someone can differ with me, you actually are able to take real-time data and figure out what the data is telling us and where the data is telling us. So look at this slide. This slide is probably the most important thing. All right. Questions on that?
There's another question that came in, is how can a diverse group of people make effective decisions?
Let me make a comment on that. When you say diverse, do you mean nationality-wise or geographically wise? Why not? So let's take a look from the nationality-wise. You have certain people, and again, what happens is most organizations are getting flatter. They're trying to get flatter. So you have Tesla, in 2020, geographically with different past experiences. 2020, 3,600 companies went bankrupt at the height of COVID. So COVID, unfortunately, caused a lot of pain for people, but it also cleaned up a lot of companies that were not effective. Right? Is that good or bad? You can differ on that. But what happened was companies like Apple, Microsoft, John Deere, some of the real key agile companies, right, actually looked at those and said, hey, we can actually get better at this. So geographically, with different past experiences, I worked for a company that was very geographically dispersed. What I found was, as you start to look at things, you have people who create the products and you have people who build the products, right? There's two different sides of that. You need to have a good decision-making process, right? And you need to have prioritization. If you don't have prioritization, the output of that is going to be decision latency, right? Look at those three mega issues. Let's go back to that. All right, make sure people understand that. And you see here, prioritization. You only have so many limited resources. The best companies you can hear is, we will do that, but we'll do it 3 quarters from now. Right? You can either do that with project management or agile. All right, and you have to deliver things. You have to make sure. So how do you actually do this when you have a bunch of different geographical units and they have different past experiences? You need to make sure that the management who actually makes the decision, you need to make sure those managers have that ability to avoid those 3 major issues. Everywhere you look, right, it's going to be at that point. Right. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. In Scaled Agile, they have the set-based design where you try to leave your options open as long as you can, on the design team, on the development teams. That also includes doing some work that, you're looking at multiple paths to make a decision. Are those considered, the time spent on those, would those be considered, even though their hypotheses don't work, would that be considered failed work on that graph you had?
No, not really. Right.
Okay.
That isn't considered decision latency. But let's talk about that for a second. For folks who are not familiar with Agile, there's a thing called Scaled Agile, and there's obviously Scrum, right? So the idea is wait to the last possible minute before you actually commit to something, right? And make sure that you understand all the options. When you start to do that, you start to reduce the time commitment you have in those stories. Again, project management, if you look at the cone of uncertainty, the cone of uncertainty goes way up, right, when you first start to look at it, because you're looking at areas of the project that are very uncertain, right? And that sort of builds decision latency, right? Because you're not too sure what you're building. So Agile sort of says, you know what, when you get down to the nitty gritty, make sure you leave the options open. All right. Good question. Any other questions?
In regards to the difference of diversity, they were also talking about diversity in experience as well, which I thought was an interesting.
Yeah, and let me make a comment on that. As you start to look at diversity of experience, right? I'm in the older age ratings, right? People in their late 50s are starting to look at retirement. They're starting to move forward. They're starting to do other things. You have a lot of young people who are actually going up to through the ranks management. That is very important. You need to have somebody there who actually can sit with them and explain how you actually deal with prioritization, delivery, and refactoring. Because if you don't deal with those correctly, you're going to have decision latency. So as you start to do that, and the other key thing is as you start to make these decisions, you need to track them. As I went through the 7 steps of decision making, if you don't track them and you don't understand how they're actually working, that's going to be an issue. All right, how effective are they, or how non-effective are they? Did I answer your question, John?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
We do not see anything else in the chat, but did anybody else have any questions that want to yell out?
All right, so let's look at some more statistics. The standards group came out with this statistic, and 1 second, please. Studied the decision latency for over a decade and stated that a project that will create one decision for every $1,000 in project labor cost. So you're increasing that when you go from 1 hour to 5 hours. Now, I went through with a senior manager at the company I work with, and I showed him the statistic. He said, sign us up for 5 hours. We have so many areas we have to go through. And again, most companies, as you look at that, the people need to go to technology, the technology people need to go to senior management. And as that happens, as the time is clicking, right? And again, it takes the time to make a decision. Even the most sophisticated teams, between noticing a troubling change and actually formulating a decision. Right. Questions? So you have to use data, all right? And that's really the solution to this. You have to make sure, and I'm not talking data in historical project management situations. You have to use live data. You have to make sure that you have a data lake and you have a data warehouse where managers can actually look at this and say, based off of this, right, we can actually go through this. Enterprise project software, manage investments in project system of record. And let me talk about the PFMP and the PGMP. I've looked at the statistics from PMI. There was not a lot of people who had that, right? Which I find amazing, because I think from a PFMP, it's really important to make sure you understand what the portfolio is. All right, use analytics, the platform, to generate reports to management for the department and the PMO. Increase the need for data portfolio growth and governance. So you had this before, no depth in the data. I've been in situations, and I'm sure each one of us has been in situations. We've made decisions about projects. Let me ask the question of your people you work with. When's the last time you actually killed a project? It's probably few and far between. So as you start to kill the project, you're going to get to a certain point where you're going to say, well, wait a minute, that reduces our decision latency. Because you're spending time on decisions you don't need to spend time on. So as we go from before, we had no depth in data, manual reporting. Again, we have so many tools now, but I want to make sure people understand tools don't solve the problem. Tools just tell you how far behind you are, right? So automatically people will say, well, we'll put enterprise project in there, or we'll put enterprise JIRA in there. It doesn't do that. It says how bad you're doing. Right. All right. Demand for decision data by decision makers and stakeholders. Every stakeholder that I've ever dealt with, especially in Agile, understand the real-time view of this. They understand when the stories are going to be done. They understand why the epics are being done. And you see that out there, right? And you can see where it goes. It flows from step to step. Budget development, creating a process using a central source of data. So again, using data can be extremely helpful. Now, there's a whole section on budget development in Agile, and it's from a book called Beyond Budget. Managers create ideas from their investments. Again, what happens is, as you start to do this, the budget is submitted, and that's real time, all right, making sure it's there. And when they create those ideas for investments, they have to have some sort of ROI. You know, again, I've gone through a lot of situations where as you do Agile projects, the first thing the team does is put their head down and start writing stories. That's wrong, right? They need to create a vision. They need to look at the personas, and they need to create the mission statement, right? Financial management, which is key for projects. Right? And again, multiple dimensions can be viewed by directive, by capital, obligated and unobligated. So there's multiple areas in here. And then you have the project, sets a stage, sets a target for all projects, updated every 2 weeks, right? Making sure that you look at those projects and you can actually understand where they are. Project pipeline. You know, these are analytics that you should use. And this is from a Massachusetts project that they actually used by charter approval status. You know, and again, you have those charter approvals, you have the steps, and you want to speed that up as much as you can without forsaking quality. And then your lessons learned, right? This is crucial, i.e. from a perspective of Agile, it's the retrospective, right? Data analytics should be used, not looked at. This is the key thing. This is a tough thing to make people understand. You actually have data, you bring it into the retrospective. How are you going to use this in a continuous improvement method to get the team better, right? Embrace the amounts of concepts of the system and record for data. So that's important to make sure. All right. Now I wanted to put this in, and I don't get money, I don't get paid by Scrum, but this is simple, a sample skill organization. Now I know folks who work in SAFe, Skilled Agile Framework, also have very similar diagrams. But as you see at the top here, you see the product people, right? And those are people who are actually looking at what products. Keep in mind the 3 major issues that cause decision latency is you don't have enough, you can't deliver, you actually, they can't make priorities, and they actually can't refactor the organization. So what happens is they go into what's called meta scrums, and executive meta scrums to be more clear. And they actually make decisions of what priorities they're going to do. This is fascinating, because as you do this, these are product people, they're business people, and they already have gone through the ROI. They've gone through how much they can actually make from this product or project. And then they have a chief product owner, right, who actually will make the final decisions. Now you see these little dots here, these little arrows. That can be extremely time consuming for people. All right, if I go from this person to that person to that person. Usually the chief product owner in an Agile organization is very tough to get a hold of, right? But you have the VP product who actually will oversee most of this. Then underneath it, you'll actually have the actual people who commit to doing the project, right? The actual developers. And again, what you want to do is you want to make sure that they're doing the right thing. You know, you don't want to create things. And there's a principle in the Agile Manifesto, and it looks at what work don't you do? That's the most important thing. What work have you not agreed to do? Because we as humans have a tendency, whether it be project management or whatever management framework you have, you create things that companies never need or the client never needs. So you have down here, and again, what I strongly suggest is even if you don't do Scrum, and you want to actually, I've done project management from perspective of actually using this framework and actually done project management and rearranged the company that I worked in based off of this, where the product sits on top, the people actually do the work sit down on the bottom, and that is the most effective way. Okay. So you have all these different areas, and you have great products over here. All right. That's it. Any questions?
Thank you, Jim.
Thank
There
you.
was a comment from Vanna about, we're talking about, she said, I believe that we are in a refactoring phase with ChatGPT and AI. The need of the hour is for the PMOs to keep on organizing and successfully make cohesive teams with power outputs. This was back on the slide when you were showing the cost of $1,000 per hour for the latency.
Yeah, you look at ChatGPT and AI and all those information, watch them very closely, because again, there's two sides to this. This is a disaster for humankind, but again, what happens is you can get so much information. It's like having a room full of Nobel Prize winners, and that actually you can get information real time. You know, play with it and make sure you can actually use this, especially if you're running a PMO. I've created numerous PMOs and I've run numerous PMOs. PMOs have a problem where they actually get bogged down in sometimes the details. It makes it, you need to be much more hands-on from a PMO perspective. All right, and refactoring phase with Chat, GPT, and AI, I agree with that. And then what happens is, as you start to work through those, you're going to get your teams to sort of morph themselves into the same way as the PMO. PMOs are going to be reestablished, I would argue, especially with the advent of that, the advent of a lot of the AI.
This is true, and thank you very much, Jim, for such a wonderful presentation and content. So the whole idea here, which your presentation fits so nicely within what we do in this roundtable, the idea of evidence-based practice, and two key points here you had in your presentations is the role of data in all this, and involving people at all levels of the organization. And when we talk about evidence-based decision making, we're talking about decisions that are made from 4 sources of information, or using 4 sources of information: stakeholders' input, expert judgment, data analytics, you mentioned, and obviously we encourage people to use scientific research as well, as much as possible. For the last part, a challenge for small businesses, is to have access to scientific research. But as you can see here, a lot of the things you talk about in decision latency, they actually based on established management principles and proven research theories. So this is fantastic. Thank you very much, Jim.
Yeah, and I thanks, Jacques. And there's another question or observation. How can project managers ensure data privacy and security with utilizing data for decision making? The first thing you have to do is go through those 7 steps, right? You have to make sure you understand what problem you're trying to solve and actually create alternatives and go through all 7 steps. It's important, especially as you start to, let's say you're a very waterfall organization. And I've seen this happen many, many times. As organizations have evolved, they become more aware of privacy and security. So from an agile organization, you actually have things like the definition of done. So before you can actually send out a product, send out a project, you have to meet that definition of done. And that really makes sure the privacy and security is there. How to reduce confirmation any thoughts on how to reduce confirmation bias from a decision making. Can you give a little more detail, David?
David, are you able to speak? If not,
Yeah, no, I just had to find the mute button. The question is, often if you have a preconceived notion, sometimes you can get the data to kind of confirm what you are, like your belief, rather than you like somehow not really finding or looking for the right data. I think sometimes you put data together that confirms what you thought you believed. So, in some ways, once you have an idea in your head, sometimes it causes you to not look at the data. Anyway, that's a confirmation bias.
And for someone who going through the doctrine, Jacques can relate to this. One of the things you learn is you take data and you're going to see bias in it, right? And what you think the issue is, you're going to look for data that actually backs you up on that. I see, especially AI and things like ChatGPT, is going to reduce that greatly, right?
Oh,
it is what it is. Go ahead.
That's a good point. Because if you can get things that can look at the data more objectively from an algorithm point of view, that's better than sometimes you're trying to do it on your own. So that's interesting. Good point.
And if you have certain information and what you're trying to do is to confirm it, you will always find a way to do it. So in many organizations, what they're actually doing is having in place clear guidelines about data collections, analysis, and interpretations, and making sure we actually eliminate the idea of confirmation bias and other biases in the decision-making process. But I think the idea of relying on evidence to make decisions and having other people involved in the decision-making process, can increase transparency and accountability, make it less likely for someone, to integrate or incorporate a form of bias in the process.
Yeah, and I know that a lot of times, especially where I know John, Jacques, and I teach, you don't want students to use ChatGPT. But what happens is, again, that definition I got from a friend of mine who's in Agile, he said it's like a bunch of Nobel scientists actually sitting in a room waiting for your question. And that's very powerful, right? If you do that correctly, they're going to give you what their decision is. Is it right or wrong? We don't know, right? But again, I see some very positive views for AI. Predefined criteria for go, no go. Is that a question, Mark?
No, it was just a comment having to do with this bias. In drug development, for instance, everybody loves their programs, and no program would possibly ever die unless you made some stage gates visible early on and say, unless 52% of patients meet this criterion or whatever, we're going to kill the program. It keeps people from arguing in favor with their confirmation bias.
Yes, this is fantastic, Mark. That's part of the guidelines and procedures we talk about. This is great.
And Dan, you have a question. If there's a standard procedure, where would the concept of agility be for in decision making? Is it a way of doing a job? Do you want to go off of mute, Vanda?
Hello. Yes.
Yeah.
So I was asking that we keep on talking about agile and ways of agile. So how are we going to implement the principles of agile while making a decision? Is it like in the way people work in an organization, or that's my question.
Well, the idea is in agile, you do scaled agile, right? And then you do safe, right? You do these scaling methods that actually reduce the bureaucracy, make sure those 3 mega issues are very much dealt with, right? And have people collaborate. I've been involved. I know Jeff Sutherland personally, and he created that. Him and a bunch of folks created scale, Scrum at Scale. And it's really the only really true method scaling. And some people love SAFe, that you can actually take it and you can actually let the people who are doing the work collaborate with each other and make decisions quicker. So you want to make sure that you have a skilled method, and that will be implemented in Agile projects. And again, I bring up Agile because, you know, that's really where my expertise is right now. But again, you look at it, you stand back and you say, everything we learned about management, throw it out the window. Everything. I say this to students, you know, we're in a new world, right? We actually get information to us so quickly. You know, you look at Tesla, you know, and you look at some of these, read some of these product creation books of how they actually do this, you know, and it's completely new. So the rules that we grew up with are gone. Now what we need to do is look at the rules that we have. And in some cases, there are no rules, and that's okay, right? But you need to make sure you understand that.
Thank
Other
you.
questions? You're welcome. Other questions? This is good, thank you. I apologize, my voice is a little hoarse today. What's the technique? Oh, we got another one here. I think SAFe implementations depend on the environment, transparency, inspection, needs team decision making, and focus vision. I agree with you, David. I'm not a big fan of SAFe. I think it's a little too bureaucratic. You know, you may differ from me, but I think Scrum at Scale is definitely more down to earth. What technique have we used in case of issue raised by internal and external stakeholders? If you do a scaling method, and even if you do really structure the PMO effectively, the PMO, if you're working PMO, not a advisory PMO, they can actually deal with those internal and external stakeholders, right? And they can raise those issues quickly. If you're an agile organization, you have a scaling method where you actually have the executive meta scrum and the scrum of scrums, we can actually take those in quickly. The idea is reduce that 1 hour, or reduce it down to 1 hour, making sure that it was proved that your success of the projects will go up greatly, and get rid of the work that we don't need to do. And that's not an agile concept. That's an actual every concept. When I know all the answers, they change all the questions. I agree. So hopefully this is helpful, but my parting thought is make sure that the organizations that you're in don't focus as much on project management or agile. Focus on a business agility, right? Making sure that the company that you're working for, and you can make things leaner. I would strongly suggest take a lean class, right? That is not, it's agnostic, and you make sure that you understand why you're doing things. All right. I think there's 2 other questions, Jacques. Oh, thank you. Okay, that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you. This is such a great session, and thank you very much, Jim. You know, despite not feeling too well, you're here to present, and it was a fantastic presentation. Thank you all for attending. We look forward to seeing you next month. But remember, same time, the 3rd Thursday of the month. We're here to talk about different things. So as you can see, it can be very interactive, where we all contribute to the project management community. Thank you very much. Thank you, John, for facilitating. You are fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Thanks, Jacques. Remember, we're always looking for speakers. Please
Yes.
consider speaking. You can see Jim here. He did not die presenting, so no one has ever died at the events at the EPM Roundtable. We want to hear from you. Please reach out to myself or Jacques if you want to present and share your thoughts and ideas. So thank you very much.
Be very
Thanks,
happy.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.